Hello, welcome to the webinar on accessibility. This is for both the Recruiting and Retaining a Strong Core and Position Description webinar series. As we begin writing our position descriptions or writing out anything for social media and trying to recruit members, make sure that we research the way that people in the communities that you're writing about prefer to be identified and use the terms that they prefer. So that means write using inclusive language. Avoid terms such as the disabled or a quadriplegic. Instead, use terms such as people with disabilities or a quadriplegic person. However, some members of some communities prefer the identity first language. This is common in autistic, blind, and deaf communities. So a person first example would be a person with a disability. An identity first example would be a disabled person. So be mindful that when you are creating your post I would do the person first example and use that in any sort of language that you're discussing, but know that some members of some communities would prefer the identity first. Avoid language such as victim of, suffering from, or wheelchair bound. Instead, use more neutral phrases such as experiencing, living with, or uses a wheelchair. Avoid euphemisms or patronizing terms such as a physically challenged, a special, differently abled, or handy capable. When you are trying to reach out to older adults, avoid terms and figures of speech such as the elderly, the aged, senior citizens, 80 years young. Instead, use terms such as older adults or an aging population. If you are also writing your position description or doing any sort of recruitment marketing, highlight the need and the value your program places on expertise or experience. Avoid ableist language. Make sure that your position description places a high importance on recruiting a diverse core and show that your organization is open to people of all backgrounds and abilities. So some examples of ableist language, we tend to get crazy during member celebration, or the crippling effect of X, Y, and Z on our community. And native versus non-native speakers, maybe use the term bilingual instead. So just because somebody maybe has some sort of a limit of something doesn't mean that they can't complete the activity necessarily that you're asking them to do. Avoid gendered language. This one is difficult. I find myself doing this as well. So instead of saying like, hey guys, maybe you say, hey folks. Some other examples are, this should take about 15 man-hours to complete, or it's best for mankind. Or when addressing members in an email, instead of using Mr. or Mrs., maybe just use their first name instead. If you're creating a post for maybe something like education, a lot of times that is a female-focused area, so we're using words like compassionate or caring, and those aren't really necessarily geared toward a more masculine group of individuals. On the flip side, for disaster services, a lot of times in postings I would use active or independent or assertive, and those are very masculine terms. So trying to come up with some more neutral language is very important. Avoid violent language. Below are examples of violent language terms and phrases that are pretty common. So whether you're in training with your members or just conversing with them, make yourself aware of some of that violent language and try to eliminate it from your vocabulary. For accessibility, those who may have some sort of a visual impairment, there are 1 in 30 people that are blind or visually impaired. Around 15% of the population is dyslexic, and 1.5 million people in the US have a learning disability. And along with that, 35% of adults don't read for pleasure, so their reading capabilities are lower than maybe they should be. So in an effort to be accessible to all individuals, make sure you're using fonts that are not very elaborate or ornate, because those can be very difficult to read. You want to make sure that the fonts that you use have a clear letter shape that are defined in shape and size. And this same kind of rule applies to handwriting style fonts, which are popular in a lot of communications and marketing, but can be difficult to read for a lot of individuals. Make sure your font format is clear as well. Adjust the space between sentences and paragraphs. Avoid using all capitals or excessive italics or underlines. Use when necessary. A person with a visual disability might miss out on a meaning that's conveyed if there's particular colors. So maybe somebody who's colorblind, you might add an underline to a color-coded hyperlink so that people know that it's a hyperlink and not just the color, if that makes sense. Include alt tags. I know we've talked about these in the past, but make sure that those people who are using screen readers have the ability to understand all of your hashtags and your photographs that you place in there, that you want to make sure that those are very clear for all audiences. In order to do an alt tag, right click, and you're going to go down to edit alt tabs and then edit text on the left hand side, and then you can edit or add text to an image of some kind so that a screen reader can pick that up. When you're adding that language, make sure it describes what the picture is of and why it's there. The accessibility checker, in order to do that, you're going to go under, if you're in Word, you'll go under Review and then Accessibility, and then there's a little accessibility checker button, and that will walk you through whether things are accessible in your document or not. If you're using a hyperlink, avoid using terms such as click here or go here or learn more. Use the full title of the destination page so that candidates who are using a screen reader know exactly where they are going if they choose to click on that hyperlink. If you're using tables, screen readers keep track of their location by counting the table cells. So make sure that you're not like skipping table cells, or that you provide a header on all of your tables. That's going to be very helpful. And if people are using an immersive reader, or I'm sorry, the screen reader, you can make sure and double check to like hear what it's saying. So if you go to immersive reader in your document, you can select View and Immersive Reader, and then on the Immersive Reader tab, you can select Read Aloud, and then it will read your document, your website, or your page, or whatever you're trying to put out for the public. It will read it for you and make sure that it is, you can double check to make sure that it is accessible. Those were just some quick little tidbits for you, but there is an entire gender language decoder that you can check out there. There are some websites on how to make sure your document is accessible and the types of accessibility. And then also how to add your alt tabs are all listed there. I wish you all the best.